Today I want to begin with a true story, but the person's name I've changed to protect their anonymity. It's a story of a woman, or I should say a girl, by the name of Sally. Sally is about 10 years old, and she grew up in an unstable home life. Her mom and dad had issues, and she did the best she could at school. Her mom and dad tried to work out things, but it didn't work out so well. DCS had to be called in, and Sally went to go with the counselor with DCS. She was put in a foster home in her area. She lived there for a couple months, and then that foster family felt like, we just can't do this anymore, and she was put in another foster home. After a few more months, maybe about 5 or 6 months, that foster family felt like they just can't quite do that. In the meantime, her caseworker, who's been watching her case, changed jobs. She quit. So her case was put in another person's purview to look after and follow up with her. She's put in another foster home. So she was in 3 foster homes in 1 year. She's 10 years old. Imagine her life. And I discovered this week that this isn't an isolated case. In fact, in the state of Tennessee, I discovered that roughly about 1/3 of kids who are put in foster care have go to 3 different foster care homes in the first year of their life. And Tennessee is the worst in the nation in this. In fact, there was an interview that was done, and a guy who's in part of administration by the name of Richard Kennedy said, "We desperately need more foster homes. The more foster homes we have, the support children." How does it respond to that? And this is just one of many different needs in our world. We're in this series called Questioning Christianity, where we're looking at difficult questions. And today's question is a very difficult one. Specifically, why does the church not focus on the things that really matter? Why do they focus on ancillary issues when the things that really affect people's lives, often they don't pay attention to? People inside the church, and especially outside the church, often have a critique against the church, and it goes in the form of this. Number one, the church is more interested in building up their own personal kingdom or their brand than they are about helping people. Objection number 2, the church is more about aligning and trying to get political power to have coercive influence over people's lives. And the third one is simply this: the church really emphasizes just personal salvation, me and Jesus, and really forgets about the entire world. And therefore, I really can't be part of a church anymore. How does the church respond to those things in our day and age where we're skeptical about everything? That's why I want to look at our passage today in a little bit more detail. So our main passage today is in the book of Micah. Micah chapter 6 is our text, and as always, you can access the sermon notes on the YouVersion app if you'd like. Now, if you know anything about Jesus, when he spoke out against injustice, he spoke out specifically to the people who claimed to know God the best. And they were the ones who said they would know God the best, but often those are the ones Jesus was harshest to. But he shows mercy and kindness to the people who are, in a sense, outsiders. And this is the same thing that happens in the prophet Micah. Now let me give you a little bit of historical background of the prophet Micah. Micah lived roughly about 2,700 years ago. His prophecies happened roughly around 740 BC. The context is he lived in a nation that was divided between north and south. Sound familiar? A northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And he was a prophet who preached into that. His nation was under threat of the nation of Assyria to defeat it. And so in that day and age, injustice was everywhere. So for example, if you read earlier in Micah, he talks about how the wealthy were exploiting the poor. He talks about those who were leaders, how they were using their position of influence to get bribes to accomplish their own desires. And in the midst of this, he writes this in Micah chapter 6, verse 6. And it's interesting how he starts off, and I'll just read some of this to you. Verse 1, he says, "Listen to what the Lord says." Now, the next thing that happens is quotation marks. So the next sayings that are coming are not from the prophet Micah. They are all coming from God. And this is what God says in verse 2. He says, "Hear, you mountains, the Lord's accusation. Listen, you everlasting foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a case against his people. He is lodging a charge against Israel. My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. I brought you up out of Egypt, and I redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, and Aaron and Miriam." So what's he saying there? God is saying, basically, I've done all these things for you. What do you have against me? Why are you not following me? In fact, this is the case. I've shown you great mercy by bringing you out of slavery and into freedom. And how do you repay me? How do you repay each other? You exploit people. And then he goes on in verse 6, and let me say it again. Verse 6, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings and calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of olive oil? If I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul." To put that in our terms today, what can I give God in my day for what he's done for me? Should I go to church every Sunday? Should I go to church every day? Should I take up a tithe? Should I serve? Should I help everybody with all the needs in the world? Should I live this way? And then it says this, and this is Micah speaking. "He has shown you a mishpat," which means to act fairly, to defend the oppressed or the vulnerable. It also means to live in right relationship with God. You don't live in right relationship with God just with the people who are like you, but you show kindness and mercy to those who are not like you. This is how the marketing campaigns. The early church grew not because of buildings, because they didn't have any. The reason the church grew was of acts of love and mercy. So for example, in Roman culture, let me ask you this question. I want you to talk to me from this. Is it better to be born a boy or a girl in Roman culture? A boy. You want a boy. You don't necessarily want a girl. Did you know in that culture, if you had a girl, it was perfectly morally acceptable. Hard and to take her out in the woods and leave her there to die. This actually happened. It was morally acceptable. Didn't even think about it. And then the Christians, this small little minority sect, remembered the words of Jesus. "Let the little children come to me." There's got to be a better way. There's something that I could do. And so those early Christians, they saw these little kids out in the woods. And so what they did was they would see these little girls and they would adopt them into their own homes. They would treat them as one of their own children. Now I want you to think about that as family after family after family does this, year after year. Imagine a decade after decade. What happened in Rome, there was a problem. The problem in Rome was there were all these boys looking to get married, and there's not amount of girls, right? But all of a sudden, they find that there's all these girls over in this religious sect called Christianity. And all of a sudden, boys started to be interested in what the Christians had to say, all right? So one of the ways the church grew was simply, but they cared for the vulnerable. And that was a cause of the growth of the church, to act justly. The second one, to love mercy. I was curious what that meant in the original language. It meant this: to actively pursue covenant love. In other words, mercy isn't just something of an emotion. I feel like if you watch a commercial on TV with all that music that makes you want to cry and donate $19 a month or something like that, it's not about that. It's about action, things that I can do. And that's how the early church grew as well. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, one of the problems that happened was there were these mass plagues that would go on. And think about the modern medicine was not present. Even during COVID, do you remember during COVID how somebody was sick? You kind of want to distance yourself. Well, in that culture, if you were sick and a member of your family sick and they're likely to get all of your family sick and you're going to die, what's the reasonable thing to do? The reasonable thing to do in that culture was to say bye-bye to somebody in your family. I'm sorry, you can't live here anymore. And they would put people, if they showed symptoms, outside their homes. They're doing the best they can, but the early Christians thought about that. They remembered Jesus said, whatever you do the least of my brothers and sisters, you do it unto me. And so they would care for the sick. The early Christians did this. In fact, some of these people who have made, you can read some of their commentary, but one of them says that they would nurse somebody back to health. Sometimes their sickness would come onto them, and those Christians would get sick and sometimes even die. And these early people, these early people saw all this going on, and they thought, why would my family disown me? And these people that I don't know call me brother and sister. What did they do? They acted justly. They loved mercy. And the last one is simply, they have walked humbly with God. To walk humbly with God simply means I acknowledge God's authority in my life, and I simply try to walk in step with him. I'm simply one beggar who encountered and found bread, and I'm trying to share that with others. We don't try to manipulate people. We don't try to just bang people over the head with the Bible. Instead, we walk humbly with God, and he leads us that way. And sometimes we need to remember that keep the main thing the main thing. And that's what God doesn't suggest, but requires of his people. So how does the church supposed to respond to issues like foster care and all the needs of the world? It's interesting, in my research this week, I discovered there's a ministry in Nashville trying to address this problem. And the ministry is called Crowded Table. Crowded Table, and their main idea is that we need to have more room at the table for people. And in that, they discovered in Davidson County, there are more churches than there are foster families. So they wondered, what if we could pair every church with a foster family and a caseworker? And maybe we could reduce some of that recidivism. Maybe we could have family stay. And so what they've been doing is basically trying to get 10 to 20 people at a particular church to come alongside a family for 2 years to once a week buy groceries, help with lawn care, check in with the caseworker, encourage that family. And what they found is, in their years of doing this, they have caseworkers who are not quitting. They have foster families that are staying longer. And in fact, one pastor wrote this. He said, the joy of serving children, youth, and families before, during, and after foster care has been central to the heart of our church. Our community has responded to the call in James 1:27 to care for the widow and orphan by hosting foster family recruitment events, to wrap them with love and support, to give weekly care for DCS caseworkers, offering essentials through our foster care closet. Through their commitment to the most vulnerable, we witness life transformation, generational change, and gospel impact. God the Father calls caring for the most vulnerable pure, and we are honored to love and care for the most vulnerable in our city. Now, I'm not giving a pitch that you need to help out with this. What I'm simply saying is to look around, just what Hannah said. Look around and see. What are the needs that you see where you live, in our community, that we can help with? A number of years ago, I heard two church leaders who I won't tell you their names, but they're very influential. And they were having a discussion about whether the church should be attractional or missional. In other words, should the church just try to be as attractive and get as many butts in the seats as possible? Or should the church be about helping as many people as we can? And the answer was yes. You need a church to be attractional, to help you, inspire you to live and follow Christ. But at the same time, if all it is about is getting people on a Sunday morning and we're not about impacting our community, then it's kind of hopeless. It's kind of worthless. And so at Central, that's one of the things that I feel like we do really well. We have it in our vision. We really try to help people find Jesus. I hope every Sunday you get a nugget or something that's going to help you walk and follow Jesus more. But at the same time, we actually have to be about doing stuff for the kingdom to make a difference. Sometimes that looks like corporately. I'll show you a couple pictures. Let's go to the next picture. Some of you might remember, some of you might be in this picture. A few months ago in our mission weekend, we made hygiene kits for women on the street in Knoxville. We also made blessing bags. We wrote cards to bless people in Carm. We made cookies for college students. We gave food to our local food bank. Let's go to the next picture. We've been a part of building a habitat house. Affordable housing is important around here. We've been a part of that. We've also been a part of Camp in the Community for kids that experience camp and have a Christian experience to hear about the good news. Let's go to this next picture. We've also had a mission team go to Costa Rica to show people the love of Jesus. And then I took this last picture with my phone. I don't know if they appreciated this picture when I took it. But I love that our church, we had a group for United Women of Faith go to rural Kentucky. And they've been accumulating stuff to bless the people in rural Kentucky. That's who we are. But it's not just about who we are, it's about who you are. It's not just about what we do as a church with projects or different programs. It's about yourself. Take initiative. I've been inspired by a person in our congregation who I won't say who they are, but they were touched by a person in our community who had a need. And they said, I should do something about that. I can do something about that. And they've been helping finding bedding and a place for them to stay and make a place more like a home. One person, I can do something. I can't do everything in the world, but I can do something. That's what it means to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. May God open our eyes to the ways he wants to use us. Let's pray. God, thank you for this chance to reflect on your word. We do pray that you would open our eyes to see you and that you would help use our hands, our feet, our passions, all so people could know of who you are. And we thank you for this whole